right, guys, back another again one more time. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. I want to remind you of a couple of things here before we kind of wrap up our look at energy and the uses of energy and energy in an ecosystem. So remember, if we hit rewind, remember it all comes back to the producers initially. Remember, we need to know photosynthesis, right? What plants are taking in and what they're actually making. Remember, the arrow means chemical equation. Chemical reaction, rather. So if we look at that in terms of words, remember plants have to take in CO2, have to take in water, and they absorb sunlight, the things that we know plants need, and they're going to produce sugars. There's our chemical formula for sugar, and oxygen they give off. So remember, the whole point here is to make, again, carbohydrates, to make sugars. So if we could actually draw what that looks like, remember that the interesting thing is that here's literally what it would look like. The C's are the carbons, H's are hydrogens, remember from our chemistry, and O's are oxygens. And the funny thing is that really all plants are doing is combining. You can see C's here, O's here, H's here. They're just combining them and sticking them together. So really these little lines here, these chemical bonds, that is where the energy becomes stored. It becomes locked in there. Really important point. So if we go back to what we were originally saying, remember we kept saying burning, 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 and I want to look at this visually, because remember photosynthesis, like we just said, to look at this in terms of what plants are taking in: carbon dioxide, water, and they need sunlight, and they produce, and this looks like a bean plant here, sugars, carbohydrates, and oxygen. Now remember, plants do that. Don't forget why they do that. They do that, they're making their own food. Now, what about something like this rabbit down here at the bottom? That rabbit gets into the garden and eats the plants and eats those sugars. It actually can burn those sugars. Remember, all when we say we're burning, the rabbit's not actually burning them. It's breaking apart that sugar molecule, breaking apart those bonds, and it's releasing energy. I kind of show that here. So it gets the energy. You can see it eating it. It's doing cellular respiration. So remember, the idea of photosynthesis is taking light and other materials, energy, absorbing it to make food. Cellular respiration, again, is the opposite. We're taking in the food here and breaking that down to give off energy. And they're just opposites of one another. We can't forget that. So remember, if I replaced the rabbit, swapped out the rabbit and put you in, you could eat sugars, you could eat foods, and you breathe in oxygen, you break them down to release the energy. Remember the energy we need, and you're going to breathe out. You're going to produce a little bit of water. Ever breathe onto a glass or a mirror, you can see that it fogs up. There's moisture there, and you're breathing out carbon dioxide as well. So remember, the whole goal here really is energy, locking it up in sugars and breathing that out. So last week, we spent some time actually burning and calculating energy, remember? Like you could actually burn the food. We did in calorimetry. And that's another way to do it. You burn it, and that releases energy from those bonds and the molecules. Now, remember, we said, and I had asked you that keep in mind that there's not actually fire, so we're not burning it in your body. But you can undergo chemical reactions that will break those bonds and releases the energy. So it's really essentially it's the same thing. We can't forget that. And we're just going to use the energy in those carbs to do, like you guys have said before, running, jumping, all the life things that we need. So remember, that's also why producers are making the carbohydrates too. They're not doing it for us, they're doing it for themselves. They can grow larger by adding biomass, and then they can actually break it down, becomes energy too. So now remember, think back to this is a cheesy view of if we did it in class, that we could actually light food on fire and then measure the temperature of water underneath. And from that, we can calculate how much energy is in that food. Now, remember, I'm not going to require you to calculate and do the math conversions for calories. But I do want you to know that from here on out, when we're saying that, we're talking about calories, we're measuring, it's just a measurement of energy, right? How much energy is in there. So this idea of calories, we could do that. And you did burn food stuff last Friday, and you can calculate that. So I want to focus today just real quickly on like a gross, disgusting, like a cheese ball. If we took because that was in our original video, if you light one of those cheese balls on fire, you can release the energy. So if we could do that and we could actually measure how much energy is in there, like you did on Friday last week, how many calories would actually be in there? So there's some questions we're going to be thinking about and we're going to be answering eventually here. But how many calories does a cheese ball have? So remember, luckily, Matthew Rockholtz had pointed out to us several days ago that do you actually have to burn food to get that, or can't you just look at the nutritional label? If we look at the label of foods, that tells us what's inside the food, how all of the ingredients that are in there, but it also tells us scientists have already done the work for us. They've burned the foods in calorimeters, and to tell you, hey, here, if you eat this, here's how much energy is actually in there. Um, so I want to take a quick look at the nutritional label for a cheese ball, just to show you what they look like, in case you've never seen one. I'm sure most of you probably have. And from that, we can actually, we'll be able to figure out how many calories are in a cheese ball, so we don't have to burn it. And we can do some other things from that as well. Keeping in mind that if you eat a cheese ball, your body breaks that down and releases the energy for you. Um, so you want to go back and take a quick look at that. So if we go back, I'm going to pull up our cheese ball nutritional label here, and we can see that you've seen some of these boxes before. It gives you all the nutritional facts, and if we scan down on here, it tells you all the ingredients. Sodium, we recognize sodium, right? We with food labels. Potassium, some of these elements, but also there's our carbohydrates. Some of them can be sugar, some of them can be in more complex forms. Protein, you've heard of. Fat. But up here at the top, it tells you how many calories are in a serving size. Now, if you notice, one cheese ball is not a full serving here. So a serving size is about 28 grams. So to eat a full serving, this is kind of gross, of cheese balls, you'd have to eat 34 cheese balls. And if you ate 34 cheese balls, you would get 160 calories. So if we divide 160 calories by 34, we end up with a number of 4.7. That means that in each and every cheese ball, one single cheese ball has 4.7 calories in that, which is also kind of strange. Like, is that a lot? Is that a little bit? Is that um, uh, kind of kind of strange when we think of it that way, that it's a cheese ball you think is light and fluffy. That's, could you live off of just eating cheese balls? It gets kind of crazy if you started to think about how many cheese balls you would have to actually eat, because if we go back to our information and we think about this in terms of calories, it's estimated, and this is on the average, that we want to end with this idea here. One cheese ball, 4.7 calories, right? But the average middle school student, it's suggested, needs to eat at least 2,000 calories per day. So I want to end and have you think about here for our exit ticket to wrap your head around here. If that's the case and all you could eat are cheese balls, it'd be so disgusting and unhealthy. But how many cheese balls a day would you have to eat to get your daily requirement of calories? So now I want you, that's actually going to be our focus for our exit ticket here. So I'm going to wrap up and end with that. Now, keeping in mind, if you have to get 2,000 calories to survive, to make your heart beat, to be able to breathe, to think, to move, that's what we need to survive there. If you had to get 2,000 calories and all you could eat are cheese balls, one cheese ball is 4.7 calories. How many of those cheese balls would you have to eat? Kind of crazy. So we're going to end there with that idea, and we'll touch base again tomorrow. So I'm going to have you head over to the exit ticket at this point. You might need a pen and paper, maybe a calculator. And I've got a couple of questions for you to wrap up with calories.